What happened at your school that still doesn't feel real? I was halfway through the state exam when my prosthetic hand started malfunctioning. In just seconds, my fingers were curling in on itself. Mr. Rogers, I gasped as the motors whined. Something's wrong with my prosthetic. Mr. Rogers didn't even glance up from his clipboard. State testing protocol. No disruptions, no exceptions. The mechanical fingers were digging into the palm now. The pressure was way beyond what it should be. This is a medical emergency. The safety features aren't working. How convenient. He finally looked at me. Your prosthetic just happens to break during the most important test of the year? Crack. One of the plastic joints in the thumb snapped. It's literally breaking apart. Then you should have taken better care of your equipment. The prosthetic hand was designed to grip with the same pressure as a normal human hand, but it was squeezing way harder than that now. Please just let me disconnect it because there's an emergency release button. Touch that device and you fail automatically since no electronic devices are allowed during state exams. Destiny, who was sitting next to me, leaned over and whispered with concern in her voice, "Is that smoke coming from your arm?" Gray fog was rising from my wrist joint where the motors were overheating, and the smell of burning plastic filled my nostrils while the heat spread up my forearm. Mr. Rogers, it's literally on fire! Stop being dramatic when we only have 17 minutes left. The prosthetic hand suddenly jerked open with all 5 fingers shooting straight out, then slammed back into a fist with so much force that my desk cracked under the impact. It felt like someone was trying to unscrew my arm from my body. "Oh my gosh!" Willie shouted from the back row as he jumped to his feet. "We need to get him help now before something worse happens." "Silence!" Mr. Rogers roared with his face turning red. "The next person who speaks gets expelled from the district." Jane from 2 rows over was frantically texting under her desk while trying to stay hidden. "I'm calling my mom because she's a nurse at the hospital. Phone now." Mr. Rogers marched toward her with his hand extended. I tried reaching for the emergency release with my left hand, but my fingers were shaking too badly to grip the small button properly. The prosthetic was rotating now, with the entire hand spinning way past its normal range of motion. Blood ran down my arm and dripped onto the test paper. "Someone call 911!" Destiny was crying as she jumped up and ran for the door in desperation. Mr. Rogers moved quickly to block her path. "Sit down immediately or you're suspended for the rest of the year." "He's bleeding and needs medical attention," she screamed directly in his face. "Everyone needs to put their phones away now because state testing violations will be prosecuted to the fullest extent." 3 more students stood up simultaneously, and Josh, the quarterback who'd never gotten in trouble before, stepped into the aisle with determination. "This is insane, and you need to let him get help before it's too late. You want to lose your football scholarship, Josh? Then sit down and be quiet." Every forced rotation sent lightning bolts of pain through my nerves, while the burning smell grew stronger. "Just rip it off and get it over with," someone yelled from the corner. I couldn't do that. The titanium post was surgically implanted directly into my bone after 8 months of procedures, drilled right into the marrow. Katie was crying while banging on the window to get someone's attention in the hallway. "Help! Somebody please help us! He's dying!" Mr. Rogers marched over to where I was writhing in my seat. "This ridiculous performance ends right now." "Don't touch it!" I screamed as loud as I could. "Mr. Rogers, no!" Multiple students yelled in unison as they saw him reaching for my arm, but he grabbed the prosthetic wrist with both hands. "I've had enough of your attention-seeking behavior and fake emergencies." He yanked with all his strength. The sound that came out of me wasn't human. He didn't just pull off a prosthetic like taking off a glove. He ripped out the metal post drilled into my bone, chunks of muscle tissue, and connected nerves. Blood sprayed across 3 desks. I hit the floor hard, clutching what was left of my arm with my remaining hand. "Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!" Multiple voices were screaming at once. "Nobody move!" He was backing away slowly while still holding my prosthetic like he couldn't believe what he'd done. His face had turned completely white. "State testing protocol says..." Willie was slamming his full body weight against the door repeatedly. "It's locked! Why the hell is it locked? Automatic locks engage during testing periods, and no one leaves for 13 more minutes." Josh and 3 other football players rushed toward Mr. Rogers at once. "Give us your keys right now! Stay back or you're all getting expelled and losing your futures." My vision started tunneling to black, while the pain reached levels beyond description. "Stay with me and keep your eyes open." Destiny was slapping my face gently. "Don't you dare close your eyes." More students were pounding on the door from both sides, and someone picked up a desk chair with determination. "Don't you dare break that," Mr. Rogers started to say. Crash! The window shattered into 1,000 pieces as the chair went through it. Bang! The door suddenly exploded open, and the janitor stood there holding a set of master keys. His eyes widened as he took in the scene of blood and chaos. "What the F? Call 911 now!" Everyone screamed at once. At the hospital, I had to go through 3 surgeries. First one just to save my life. Second, to repair what they could. Third, to prepare for a new prosthetic someday. I had 40% blood loss. Any more, and I wouldn't have made it. Mr. Rogers was arrested in the parking lot, my prosthetic still in his hand, my tissue still hanging from it. The state testing board gave him paid leave, but that wasn't enough. He tore my arm off, so I was ready to tear apart his life, limb by limb. The first thing that broke through the fog was that sound, that wet tearing noise when the titanium post ripped out of my bone. My eyes shot open to bright hospital lights and monitors beeping everywhere. The nurse checking my IV jumped back when I started thrashing, and she grabbed my shoulders to hold me down. "You're safe now. You're in the ICU," she kept saying while I tried to figure out where I was. My throat felt like sandpaper, and when I tried to talk, nothing came out but a croak. She gave me ice chips that melted on my tongue while explaining I'd been out for 2 days after 3 back-to-back surgeries. "You've been screaming in your sleep," she said quietly while adjusting the morphine drip. My parents were slumped in chairs by the window, and Mom's eyes were red and puffy when she noticed I was awake. Dad's hands were shaking as he stood up and walked over to my bed. They'd heard everything, every scream, every nightmare about that classroom. The detective showed up that afternoon while I was still floating from the pain meds. He pulled out a notebook and clicked his pen while asking me to start from the beginning. My words came out slow and slurred, but I told him about the prosthetic crushing itself, the smoke rising from the motors, Mr. Rogers refusing to let anyone help. He wrote down every detail about the locked doors that wouldn't open for 13 minutes minutes while I bled out on the floor. "We have the prosthetic as evidence," he said while flipping through photos on his phone. The image made my stomach turn because my tissue was still hanging from the metal fingers like some horror movie prop. The district sent their representative the next morning, and she stood at the foot of my bed reading from index cards about their ongoing investigation and commitment to student safety. Her eyes kept darting to the ceiling, the walls, anywhere but the thick bandages wrapped around what was left of my arm. She droned on about policies and procedures while I watched the IV drip and counted the seconds until she'd leave. "Get out," I finally managed to say, and she practically ran from the room. Destiny showed up on day 3 looking like she hadn't slept since the incident. Her hands were shaking and tears started rolling down her face before she even sat down. "I should have tackled him," she kept saying over and over. "I should have done something sooner instead of just standing there." She described watching me pass out from blood loss and thinking I was dying right there on the classroom floor. I told her she saved my life by slapping me awake when everything was going black, but she just shook her head and cried harder. My phone started buzzing non-stop when someone posted a video from the classroom online. The footage was grainy and only 30 seconds long, but you could hear the screaming and see the chaos as students tried to break down the door. The comments section exploded with people calling for Mr. Rogers to be fired immediately, while others demanded criminal charges. My notifications wouldn't stop coming, and each ping made my head pound worse. The hospital financial counselor knocked on my door that afternoon with a thick folder of paperwork. She explained in this calm voice that a new prosthetic would cost at least $40,000, and that didn't include the months of physical therapy I'd need. Insurance was reviewing whether this counted as a covered incident since the original prosthetic had malfunctioned before the injury. I wanted to throw something at her, but I only had one hand now and it was connected to an IV. She left more papers on my bedside table about payment plans and financial assistance programs. My first physical therapy session was just trying to sit up without falling over. The weight imbalance from my missing arm made everything feel wrong, and I kept tipping to one side. Something feels really off about how Mr. Rogers kept talking about state testing rules while a kid's arm was literally smoking and breaking apart. What kind of training makes someone ignore such obvious danger signs? The therapist had gentle hands, but every movement sent fire shooting through my shoulder where they'd tried to repair the damage. She helped me stand for 10 seconds before my legs gave out, and I collapsed back onto the bed, gasping. "We'll take it slow," she promised while making notes on her clipboard. "Maybe 6 months before we can even think about fitting you for a new prosthetic." That night, the dream hit me hard, and I was back in that testing room with the doors slamming shut over and over. The locks kept clicking, and Mr. Rogers kept reaching for my arm no matter how much I screamed. I woke up to monitors going crazy and phantom pain burning through an arm that wasn't there anymore. The nurse rushed in and pushed something into my IV that made the world go soft around the edges. "It's for anxiety," she explained while resetting the alarms. The messages from classmates were split right down the middle when I finally checked my phone. Half were saying they were praying for me and couldn't believe what happened. The other half were posting that I probably broke my own prosthetic on purpose to get out of the test. Someone wrote a whole paragraph about how convenient it was that my device failed during the most important exam of the year. My finger hovered over the reply button, but instead I just deleted every social media app on my phone. Dad came by that evening and sat on the edge of my bed with this look on his face like he had something terrible to tell me. "They arrested Rogers in the school parking lot," he said slowly. "He still had your prosthetic in his hands with tissue still attached to it." His jaw clenched when he explained that the state testing board had given Mr. Rogers paid administrative leave pending their investigation. "Paid leave," he repeated like he couldn't believe the words. "For ripping your arm off, he gets paid leave." Mom burst through the door 10 minutes later with her phone already out and started scrolling through lawyer websites while Dad explained what happened. She kept saying we needed legal help right now, today, this second, but I told them to wait because I had other plans first, and lawyers would just slow everything down with their procedures and settlements and paperwork. Mom grabbed my good hand and said I was in shock, that I wasn't thinking clearly, but I'd never felt more focused in my life because Mr. Rogers needed to pay for what he did, and the legal system would take forever. My phone buzzed with a text from Willie, and when I opened it, there was a photo of the testing room with my desk still showing that huge crack from where my prosthetic had slammed down, plus dark stains on the floor they couldn't get clean. I saved the photo to a new folder I named Evidence and started typing out a list of everyone who was in that room, every single person who saw Mr. Rogers grab my arm and pull until it tore off. The hospital social worker knocked and came in with a stack of papers, explaining my rights as a victim and how the locked doors were a clear ADA violation since they prevented me from getting medical help during an emergency. She handed me pamphlets about trauma support groups and disability accommodations while I nodded and pretended to care, but really I was thinking about how I'd already found Mr. Rogers' home address on the county property records website. The next morning I called the ADA complaint hotline from my hospital bed and told the woman on the other end exactly what happened with the automatic locks that wouldn't open even when I was bleeding out on the floor. She kept gasping and saying, "Oh my goodness," as I described being trapped for 13 minutes while my arm was literally torn from my body, and she promised they'd investigate immediately because this was the worst violation she'd heard in 20 years. Josh texted me that afternoon saying the administrators were already telling everyone the doors have to lock during state testing with no exceptions ever, not even for fires or medical emergencies, because that's what the state requires. He'd been asking questions in every class, and the assistant principal had already pulled him aside twice to warn him about his attitude problem and how it might affect his college recommendations. I told him to keep asking anyway, and to record everything they said if he could do it without getting caught. My parents went behind my back and hired a civil attorney named Amina Farouk, who showed up at the hospital wearing a suit that probably cost more than our car, and immediately started firing off questions about the incident while taking notes on her tablet. She filed FOIA requests that same day for all the testing protocols, every email about the incident, Mr. Rogers' complete personnel file, and any previous complaints about him or the testing procedures. I realized that maybe having a lawyer wouldn't slow down my other plans after all, especially when she mentioned she could subpoena security footage and force people to testify under oath. Amina came back the next day with a stack of document requests she was submitting to the school district. 17 different demands for every email, every policy manual, every previous complaint about testing protocols, or Mr. Rogers going back 10 years. The district would have 30 days to respond, and she said if they tried to hide anything, she'd file for sanctions and make them pay for obstruction. An anonymous student sent me a video through a fake Instagram account, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped because it was longer than the first one with crystal clear audio of Mr. Rogers saying, "State testing protocol," right before he grabbed my prosthetic. You could hear the crack when he pulled, my scream that followed, and then him saying, "Nobody move," while still holding my severed arm like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Amina watched it 3 times and said this was direct evidence of willful disregard for safety, that he chose testing rules over a student's life, and any jury would be horrified. Diego Alvarez from the prosthetics company called my hospital room and said he'd heard about the malfunction and wanted to examine the failed device to figure out what went wrong. He seemed genuinely upset about what happened and mentioned their insurance might cover a full replacement if the investigation showed it was mechanical failure rather than user error, which was the first bit of hope I'd had about getting a new arm. But then 3 days later, a letter arrived from the insurance company saying they were investigating whether this was a pre-existing device failure that I should have reported earlier, and they were pausing all coverage decisions until their investigation was complete, which could take up to 6 months. I read it twice before crumpling it up and punching the hospital wall with my remaining hand so hard that the nurse came running in because she thought I'd fallen. 2 days later, a local reporter named Seyun Adebayo called my hospital room and asked if I'd be willing to talk about what happened in that testing room. My mom started to say no, but I grabbed the phone with my good hand and told him to come right away. When he arrived with his camera guy, I sat up in the hospital bed and didn't hold anything back. I described how the motors in my prosthetic started whining and overheating until gray smoke was pouring out of the wrist joint. I told him about the burning smell of melting plastic filling my nose, while the mechanical fingers crushed into my palm with way more force than they were designed for. I explained how it felt like someone was trying to unscrew my entire arm from my body, while Mr. Rogers just kept saying state testing protocol over and over. The camera guy had to stop filming twice because Seyun looked like he was going to be sick. That night, the segment aired on the 6 o'clock news, and my phone started buzzing with texts from everyone who saw it. The next morning, Superintendent Yara Haddad's secretary called and said the superintendent needed to meet with me and my parents immediately about the incident. 3 hours later, she walked into my hospital room with 2 men in expensive suits who stayed near the door like bodyguards. She kept looking at the bandages covering what was left of my arm, and her hands were shaking when she set her briefcase on the table. She started talking about finding a path forward for everyone and how the district wanted to support my recovery in every way possible. The lawyers moved closer, and one of them pulled out a folder while the superintendent kept talking about healing and moving past this unfortunate situation. The lawyer slid a paper across my bed tray, and I saw the words non-disclosure agreement at the top in bold letters. Below that was something about a $50,000 education grant that would be paid immediately if I agreed to stop all public statements about the incident and withdraw my ADA complaint. Amina had just walked in to check on me, and when she saw the paper, she actually laughed out loud right in their faces. She picked up the NDA and read through it quickly before tossing it back at them like it was garbage. I pushed myself up higher in the bed and told them exactly what I wanted instead of their money. I wanted written policy changes that would guarantee medical emergencies could override any testing protocol no matter what. I wanted mandatory training for every single proctor in the district about recognizing and responding to student medical crises. And I wanted Mr. Rogers permanently banned from ever teaching or working with students again anywhere in the state. The superintendent's face went pale, and she said they would consider my requests and get back to us. Amina crossed her arms and said we'd see them in court if they thought $50,000 would make this go away. After they left, my phone buzzed with a text from Destiny, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. She was in the principal's office getting written up for leaving her seat during state testing when she tried to help me. The way those lawyers tried to buy silence with $50,000 makes me wonder how often schools do this when something terrible happens. I'm really curious why they think money fixes everything instead of actually changing the dangerous rules that hurt students. She was panicking about her college applications because the disciplinary notice would show up on her transcript. I called her immediately and told her to get her parents involved right away because this was insane. The next day, Josh texted me that his football coach had pulled him aside after practice. The coach said administration was concerned about Josh's involvement in the situation, and if he kept speaking up about what happened, his scholarship recommendations might be affected. The threats were starting and they weren't being subtle about it. I was so mad I almost threw my phone, but Amina had better news when she arrived that afternoon. The FOIA documents we'd requested had finally come through, and she'd found something huge in the stack of papers. The auto-lock policy for testing rooms specifically stated there were no overrides for any reason, including medical emergencies. She also found 3 previous complaints about Mr. Rogers ignoring student medical needs during tests over the past 5 years. One kid had an asthma attack, and Mr. Rogers made him wait until testing ended to use his inhaler. Another student with diabetes wasn't allowed to check her blood sugar when she felt faint. A third had a seizure disorder, and Mr. Rogers refused to let the nurse in when the student started showing warning signs. We sent everything to Seyun immediately, and he ran another segment that night showing the documents on screen. Parents started going crazy when they saw the proof that their kids could be trapped in a room during a medical emergency. Someone started a petition online demanding the district change the lock policy immediately. Within 2 days, over 800 people had signed it, and the school board had to schedule an emergency meeting because parents were calling non-stop. My phone dinged with a message from someone I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, I saw it was from the janitor who'd unlocked the door that day. He said he needed me to know something about